Hi, you're listening to It Happened to Me, a rare disease and medical challenges podcast. The mission of our podcast is to support you, our listeners, and to create community as you confront the toughest challenges in life. All of us will experience health hardships. The real question is how we adapt. That's the focus of It Happened to Me, which wants to help you overcome limitations and live a full and satisfying life. Drawing on their own health challenges, co-hosts Kathy Gildenhorn and Beth Glassman interview guests who share stories and research to help you succeed in the face of difficult health obstacles. It happened to me. I'm not alone, and neither are you.
Today, we're excited to welcome Rachel Schreiman to It Happened to Me. Rachel is a certified public accountant and musician who holds an MBA from the University of California, Irvine. In 2019, while working as the controller for a trade association in Washington, D.C., she suffered 2 episodes of NAION. This is a debilitating condition in the eye that occurs from the lack of sufficient blood flow to the optic nerve. Rachel has experienced significant central vision loss.
After receiving rehabilitation care and training, she started a new career devoted to others with low vision. Rachel now works for Dr. Suleiman Alibhai, a low vision rehabilitation optometrist, and as a Resource Navigator for the Prevention of Blindness Society, also known as POB. Both of these positions allow her to give back to others with low vision by sharing information about resources and demonstrating how to use many of the devices, assistive technologies, and application availability that allows users to live a full and independent life. Thank you so much for joining us today, Rachel. We appreciate you sharing your story with our listeners. What does NAION stand for, Rachel?
So NAION is an acronym that stands for Non-Arteritic Anterior Ischemic Optic Neuropathy.
That's a mouthful, Rachel. So let's start with the basics. What happened to you in 2019?
I woke up one morning in 2019, like any other day. It was a February day, and I felt like there was something in my eye, kind of like goop. You know, you wake up sometimes and you've got some goop or some, a sty or whatever in your eye. So I didn't think much of it. I went off. I drove to the train station. I got on the train. I went to work, and it just wasn't going away. So I actually walked a few blocks up the road to a CVS and bought some eye drops, thinking, what on earth is in my eye? When it didn't resolve, I contacted my optometrist, who was actually a very close personal friend, and went in to see him. He took a picture of the back of my eye and saw that my optic nerve was swollen. So he then sent me on to the Retina Group of Washington because they have much more advanced machinery. They ran a bunch of tests, ran dye through my veins, the whole bit, and sent me off to the emergency room.
So a swollen optic nerve, I take it, is not normal.
A swollen optic nerve is not normal. And I will add a piece that I didn't say earlier, which was, at the optometrist every year or ophthalmologist, they sometimes give you a choice of having a picture taken of your eye, which insurance won't pay for, and it costs an extra $50 or $60. Well, my optometrist ultimately used me with my permission as an example of why you want to let them do that. Because when he took a picture of my eye, he had a recent comparison to look at, and the optic nerve should not be swollen. Right, the optic nerve should not be swollen. And so that disturbance I had that I was thinking was something in my eye was actually a loss of vision in a little piece of my optic nerve that was swollen and kind of pushing against the bone surrounding it, causing some vision loss. Mild at that point, but some, so what seemed to me is just some little thing in my eye that I was seeing was truly coming from the optic nerve. Yeah.
Now, did you have any eye issues prior to this episode?
I did not. I had, I wore glasses since I was 10 years old and had, minor, I was actually nearsighted in one eye, farsighted in the other, but I did wear glasses, and I did have amblyopia, which is a lazy eye. So prior to this, my right eye, which was my dominant eye, was correctable to 20/20, no problem with glasses. And my left eye was correctable to about 20/30. So it didn't work as much as the right eye, but it certainly didn't cause any life issues whatsoever.
Wow. So what are the risk factors for NAION? And looking back, did you have any of them?
So, they don't know a lot about NAION, I will say. But the risk factors, to my knowledge, are as follows. Typically, it hits people who are over 50. And I was 54 when my first eye happened. So I met that one. You have to have a small optic disc, which is the bone surrounding the optic nerve, for this to create an issue. And obviously I have that. I mean, we didn't know I had that prior to this, but clearly I do have that. The other known risk factors, or the most common triggers that they know of, are sleep apnea, which I did not have. I went through 2 sleep studies and they both came out negative. So I did not have sleep apnea. Diabetes, which I did not have. High blood pressure, which I did not have. And high cholesterol, which at the time of my first episode was moderate. My cholesterol was moderately elevated, but not to the point that they would typically treat you. I mean, it was my last physical had been try to increase your exercise and watch your diet a little bit, and let's just try to get this down a tad. But it wasn't anything that normally would be treated with medication. So those are the known risk factors, but they just don't know enough about it to really know. And actually, I'm looking forward to meeting with a second doctor to see if maybe he can come up with a trigger. But in any case.
And what are the typical symptoms of NAION? And did you have those?
I'm not sure what's really typical, but I can describe, what happened to me. I think what is pretty typical is that you recognize or you notice some loss of vision, just a little bit of blurriness or a little spot in your vision. It's not, at least in my case, I didn't wake up and all of a sudden I couldn't see at all. But so you start with a little bit of a vision issue, but then as the nerve continues to swell, that vision loss becomes more and more extensive and severe. So it's not until that swelling really increases and then the swelling gets brought completely down do you know whether or not you have any long-term permanent damage. But there isn't any pain associated with it. And at least there wasn't for me. Now, again, I can only speak for myself, but that was my path. And people I have met since it happened to me seem to have kind of had a similar progression.
So are there any sort of triggers that you could point to, or something that you should avoid doing?
Like I mentioned previously, the known triggers for me were negative. So other than the cholesterol, which I started on a statin right away, even though my cholesterol level wasn't excessively high, just in case that was the trigger. But when my second eye happened, my cholesterol, I had just been to the doctor for a recheck and my cholesterol was well within the normal limit. So it doesn't appear that was my trigger. So, the only thing I could caution others about would be, if you have sleep apnea, that's one that is not easily, people don't like those CPAP machines, but if you do have sleep apnea and you're over 50, you might want to listen to your doctor and use the machine, not only because it could save your life, but also it could save your eyesight. But, and if you are diabetic or you have high cholesterol or high blood pressure, that you do, you follow doctor's orders and take your meds to try to avoid it. But really, I'm not aware of, in my case, really, there was really nothing I could do to avoid a second episode.
What you did is you wake up in the morning, you think there's something, some goop, something is in your eye, your vision is compromised, you go and see a doctor, and that leads you down the path to a diagnosis. And I think that sometimes we have this feeling, well, a good night's sleep, that's all I need, and everything will be fine. And really, by being proactive, going to see your friend, the optometrist, who then referred you to the retinal group, who then did studies, and then eventually sent you to the emergency room, this led you down a path to a diagnosis. So I think it's a valuable lesson that if something starts happening with your vision, take it seriously. We don't lose vision when we wake up in the morning. We don't lose vision throughout the day. There's something going on, and our sight is so precious that we should take it seriously.
Yes, and I know one thing we've learned, Beth, is that so many rare diseases are diagnosed via the eyes and through eyesight.
Right.
That it's so important to really pay attention.
Pay attention.
I would add to that it's actually funny you bring that up. I did call my optometrist, who I mentioned was also a very dear friend of mine. And it was a Friday. Of course, these things always happen right on a Friday.
Of course, only on a Friday.
And actually, both of my episodes I woke up with on a Friday. But when I called his office after lunchtime, when it just wasn't going away that afternoon, when I called, his office said to me, he's fully booked for today, but we can get you in tomorrow morning. And so I thought, like you said, all I need is a good night's sleep. I honestly thought something was in my eye. Never occurred to me that there was something more going on, especially since the vision loss was it was very mild at the beginning. So I said, fine, that's great. I'll see him tomorrow. He was furious with his staff and furious with me because I had his personal cell phone number because he is my friend. And he said, he really had to tell them, if somebody calls and says something is going on with my vision, I don't want to see them tomorrow. I want to see them today because of what you said. There were some really, really serious medical conditions that this could have been a warning sign of, where time really would have been of the essence. And I didn't get in that same day, but I did get in the next day. But this is the kind of thing that you think, it'll work its way out and whatnot, So you are absolutely right.
Well, is a NAION episode like getting a stroke in the eye? How would you describe it?
It's funny. I often use that analogy when I describe to people what happened to me, because it's something that the general population understands. We know what a stroke is. So it is an ischemic event. So something caused the blood flow to get cut off to my optic nerve. And I didn't mention earlier, but with NAION, it very often happens when you're sleeping. So I woke up with this both times. So this is something that typically happens while somebody's sleeping. And so, it's similar, a stroke is lack of blood flow somewhere. That's what an ischemic event is, right? Yes. So I have been told by my doctors that this was not a stroke in the traditional sense, and that I am thankfully at no higher risk for a traditional stroke than anybody else is. But it's similar in that it was, but the blood flow, to our knowledge, it was only cut off to my optic nerve. I didn't have any kind of symptoms that would indicate that there was a problem anywhere else in my body.
Wow.
But I do describe it sort of as a optic nerve stroke, which is probably not very medically accurate. A doctor might disagree with that, but it's a good way to describe it to,
that
to
people understand.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, how long does it take for the swelling to dissipate in the optic nerve? And how long does it take to know how much vision remains? And unfortunately, how much is lost after an episode?
Yeah, I think it really depends. I can say in my case, the first eye, once, took probably about 3 months to go down. And the second eye, my left eye, took a little bit longer, about 4 months. So, I've met other people who it resolved more quickly, some maybe longer. I don't know that there's a real normal timeline. Obviously, Dr. Carey or another neuro-ophthalmologist could explain that better. But in my case, that was about the timeline for both of them. And like you said, you don't know until the swelling is gone just how much vision you will have lost and what remains.
Wow.
Mhm.
So what is the treatment for NAION?
So there are no official approved treatments for NAION that they have. There are some neuro-ophthalmologists, the one that I saw specifically, they believe that treating with prednisone can help speed the
Swelling.
the reduction of the swelling, right? So it's an off-label usage of prednisone. It hasn't been proven. In my case, who knows? Anecdotally, I can say that I started the proper dosage of prednisone more quickly with my second eye because we knew immediately what was going on. And even though it took a little bit longer for the swelling to completely subside, I have more vision in my left eye than I do in my right eye. So marginally so, but who knows? Maybe because we didn't allow the swelling to get as bad, I have fewer blind spots in that eye. We just really, really don't know. My situation is complicated a little bit by the fact I mentioned early on that I had a lazy eye. And of course, Murphy's Law, the first episode where I have more significant damage was in my dominant eye. So that complicates matters a little bit.
Right.
So yeah, that's the only real treatment that's out there. And but again, that's an off-label usage. So to my knowledge, there are no known treatments.
Gotcha.
So Rachel, what are the chances if you have an episode in one eye that you will have it in the other eye? You, as you said, you did end up having it in both eyes. Do most people have that experience?
So what I've been told is that if you have it in one eye, the odds of you having a second episode in the other eye are about 30%. So it's about 30% chance, which is why it's so critical if you can identify what your trigger is, that you
avoid that.
Avoid it. So I was probably the only person ever to come out of a sleep study unhappy to hear that I didn't have sleep apnea, because had I had sleep apnea, right, I could have
do something about it.
I could have done something about it, right? So so that's the odds. So the odds, like I said, about 30% of it happening in your second eye. Now, thankfully, once you've had an episode in an eye, they say that the odds of a second episode in the same eye go down to about 5%.
Oh, wow.
So those odds are right. So those odds are a lot better. But yes, so there are many people, I guess, who it's interesting who have it bilaterally. But it's interesting because I remember your episode with Dr. Carey. He said, unfortunately, for a few people, they end up having it in the second eye. So, maybe the odds are, well, 30, I guess 70% don't, right? But
Right.
30% from my is relatively high, and
Right.
it happened.
Something.
It
Were
happened
you
to me, so.
worried, Rachel? Were you worried about it?
Oh, of course.
Yes. You were worried that it would happen in the second eye.
Of
Yeah,
course.
I would have been. Yeah.
Yeah. With the second episode, was the diagnosis and the treatment more rapid the second time around? Was the treatment any different than the prednisone in the first eye?
So the main difference the second time was that I knew what was happening. So it wasn't as scary. I mean, it was, well, I shouldn't say that. It was scarier in some sense because I knew what was happening, and I was relying now on this eye. So it was scary in the fact of, okay, now it's happening again. This was my worst fear. What, where am I going to end up at after all this? But it was easier from the perspective that I didn't have to go through the laborious process and very, very scary process of getting a diagnosis. So, the second time around, I was at work. Interestingly, I didn't notice it the second time when I woke up. There was nothing weird when I woke up. I drove like normal. I drove to the train. I got on the train. I went to work. It wasn't until I was at work and I picked up a document to read and I couldn't read it.
Wow.
That, because, at that point I had already made some modifications with my computers, my screen. I had a little bit larger font. So I really noticed it with a actual document that was 12-point font or whatever it was printed in. And I absolutely couldn't read it. So then I knew something was going on, and I got in again. Then I could act very quickly. Again, I told you it was a Friday again. I ended up going to see I fell into the trap of maybe I'm just tired because I didn't want to believe it was happening again.
Sure.
Right.
But I did get in. I did go see my friend, the optometrist, the next morning, and again, got a same day Saturday visit at the retina group because they have the better equipment, even though we knew at this point it wasn't a retina issue, but they have all the good equipment that can really see what's going on. But I didn't have to go to the ER, and I didn't have to go through all the testing. I was able to call, and once it was confirmed that my optic nerve was swollen, I could call my neuro-ophthalmologist, who was, of course, out of the country, but was able to get a hold of the neurologist that was covering from him, and I started prednisone that day. So,
wow.
Yeah. So because we knew then what was happening, and then I got in with
diagnosis and treatment was much quicker.
It was just much quicker. So the treatment was no different, but it was certainly quicker.
Right.
Yeah.
So there are conditions that could present themselves that might that a doctor might think about before coming to the conclusion of NAION, such as a stroke or a brain tumor, or even MS. I mean, you could have been facing some very, very difficult medical challenges. So how did they rule out? How did the doctors rule these conditions out?
Yeah, the path to diagnosis was long and scary. Because, once a doctor sees that the optic nerve is swollen, they start with the big stuff. So, my first day after seeing the optometrist, I mentioned I was in the ER, and I was immediately sent for a brain scan to rule out a stroke or a brain tumor. I mean, those are the biggies, right? Those are the biggies. And those are the reasons why you want to get seen immediately,
right
because
away.
If it was a stroke or a brain tumor, time is really of the essence. So thankfully in my case, those scans were negative, which was great. But the next step was being referred to a neurologist, because the optic nerve is part of the brain. Even though it affects our vision, it's a neurological issue, not an eye issue. So I was referred to a general neurologist who was very nice. He was very nice. But he told me incorrectly, he diagnosed me with optic neuritis as opposed to not optic neuropathy. And the primary the most common cause of optic neuritis is MS. So
Oh boy.
he
wow.
told me that, at my
Oh.
first appointment, he suspected MS.
Oh
And
my.
actually, it probably helped me in some way, because he went ahead and sent me right away for prednisone infusions, like really high dose infusions at an infusion center, assuming it was MS and knowing that it takes time for insurance to approve it and all that. So it did take a couple weeks, but he went ahead and ordered that while he started testing me for MS. So I did have that treatment, assuming I had MS, even though it wasn't.
Gotcha.
He tested me for MS. My MS was negative. So then he ran an entire autoimmune panel, thinking maybe it's lupus or some other autoimmune disorder that was causing the optic nerves to swell. He also tested me for Lyme disease and also AIDS and syphilis to add to the mix.
Great.
Wow.
That's great.
But thankfully, all of that came back negative. So that's a good thing.
Yes.
Because, but it stumped. Then he was stumped. And that was the point at which he referred me to a neuro-ophthalmologist.
Gotcha.
Who ultimately diagnosed the NAION.
Gotcha.
So this diagnostic journey is rather complicated and extremely frightening. We're talking about some life-threatening possibilities that you were looking at.
Mm-hmm.
I sort of shake to think about what you were being tested for, the concern and worry that you must have felt. So for someone who has this sort of issue, is it a test or is it symptoms that doctors test for?
Yeah, I think it's really diagnosed by ruling other things out. There's no actual test that I'm aware of for NAION, but I will say that the differentiation between optic neuritis and optic neuropathy is key. In that, what my neuro-ophthalmologist, once I finally got to him, once I saw him, he barely had to examine me. He knew exactly what had happened. So he said that often general neurologists they just don't have the same training and experience. So it's not in any way anything that was done wrong, but the optic neuritis and optic neuropathy are often confused. And what he told me was the biggest differentiation that would have saved me all those tests was that I had no pain. So, optic neuritis typically comes with pain, and I had no pain. So who knows, still the neuropathy the brain tumor, the stroke, all of that. Yes, absolutely. But the whole path down the MS, lupus, all that, we may have been able to avoid that had I started with a neuro-ophthalmologist, but who knows? Maybe, maybe not.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that brings up a really good question. What type of healthcare provider should you go to if something like this occurs?
Yeah, it's so hard because there's such a shortage of specialists around, right? Even when I was from the get-go, wasn't 100% thrilled with the neurologist that I had been referred to from the ER. In trying to get in with a different neurologist, the ones that are really highly regarded have very long
waiting lists.
Waiting time. So, it's hard. And neuro-ophthalmologists, as I'm sure you are aware, there is an extreme shortage of neuro-ophthalmologists, at least in the Washington area. So I have to assume everywhere. And so, I would, if it's possible, and I don't know how possible it is, if I would think that if somebody, and again, I'm not a medical professional, so take this, for what it's worth, but I would think that if you're having a neurological issue that is presenting only in your vision, as opposed to, presenting with other symptoms, including vision. But if you have something going on, it's neurological because it's your nerve, and you have no symptoms other than your vision. If you can get in with a neuro-ophthalmologist, I would think that would be advisable because that's what they specialize in.
That's who diagnosed my rare disease, was a neuro-ophthalmologist.
But I will say that the neuro-ophthalmologist that I saw
Dr. Carey, by the way, is the one.
No, I did not see Dr. Carey. No. I saw somebody else in Bethesda as well, but who's really well regarded and in the area. I got in with him because my internist intervened and made sure all my records got to him, and he reviewed my records before he agreed to see me, and he saw me very quickly because he had a sense of what was going on. So it's not as easy as just calling a neuro-ophthalmologist and saying, I think I have a problem, can you see me? They'll say, sure, I can see you in 3 months.
Right.
So
you really need an advocate. You really need someone to help you, whether it's your ophthalmologist or your internist, or someone has got to intervene on your behalf.
You're so lucky your internist did.
Yes, that it's really because these doctors are so busy, they can't afford to waste their time. So I think a lot of these specialists do require your charts and records to make sure that they are in fact the person that you should see. So that's another word to the wise, that don't give up, but ask for help.
Right.
To get in with these specialists.
Well, and I want to ask you, are there known causes of NAION? Is it an inherited condition? What do we know about that?
From what I've been told and what I have found in my own kind of online research, they really don't know. There's little known about what causes it other than the known risk factors that I mentioned previously and triggers. So I actually, to this question, was very inspired by your podcast with Dr. Carey, myself, because he did speak about some of his research into genetic causes, and I do have 3 children. So I was inspired partly by this issue to make an appointment with him, because I would like to learn more about what some of the current thinking is about genetics. I also would like to learn more get another opinion on potential triggers and what might be mine. And, I'm having some other issues related to aspirin usage because my doctor told me to take aspirin to try to keep my blood flowing. But of course, long-term aspirin is not good. So I'd like his opinion on that as well. So so I am going to see Dr. Carey in part to learn more about the genetics, because I hope there isn't a genetic link, but it'd be interesting to know.
Yeah.
But your children should really be on the lookout, and probably when they go to get their appointment with their ophthalmologist or optometrist, that is something they should talk about. That is in their history.
Yeah.
True. Now I want to talk to you about the decision not to drive. It's an incredibly difficult one. I know personally, because I too cannot drive now from visual disabilities. Now, how did you make that choice, and how did it affect your life and your independence?
Yeah, it is a big decision for many people, and it really does potentially limit someone's independence. So I understand why it is so hard and why so many people just cling to the ability to drive. In my case, it was a very easy decision. The last day I drove my car was the day I drove to work, that second episode. I realize my deficit, and I don't trust myself behind the wheel of a car. So it was a very easy decision for me, because not only do I care about my own safety, but even more so, I couldn't live with myself if I hurt somebody else. So I made the decision. I very willingly gave up my driver's license and found other ways to get around, because
I get that. Same thing.
Yeah.
I had no
Yeah.
choice.
Yeah, I recently was in the car with my husband and I made a comment because, I do work for a low vision provider now, and so many people, that's the thing they want to hold on to the
Yes.
longest. And I recently said to my husband when we were in the car going somewhere, and I said, man, I just don't get it. I know what I can't see. And he said to me, he said, no, you don't. And I said, wait a minute, you're right. I don't know what I'm not seeing, but I know that I'm not seeing what I should be seeing. So, yeah, if a kid or a person were to dart in front of my car, I wouldn't see them till it was too late. If there's a shadow or I would miss lane, there's just no way. There's no way.
And I can't
Well, I
see red and
applaud
green
you.
lights.
Yeah.
No, I applaud you because it's really that I too have given up driving. It is really a difficult decision. And I know that lots of people struggle with this, but I so applaud you because the idea of not only protecting yourself, but protecting others on the road, it's really part of being a community that we care about the safety of everyone. And I wish that people would listen. I think it's a very powerful statement that you just made.
Yeah. And there's so much, I say this in so many areas of my life. We live in a time when there's a lot of great technology out there and a lot of alternatives, one of which, like it or not, it's always a little unnerving to get in a stranger's car, but we have apps like Uber and we have Lyft and we have public and paratransit. So there are, there are other ways to get around. I'm fiercely independent and I'm a very busy person, and I have found other ways. It's just different. It's not as easy as just grabbing your keys and hopping in the car and going, but you don't have to solely rely on other people. There are ways to do this independently still. It just requires some pre-planning and some patience.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's very, very important words. Now, vision loss also can mean a change in your life as far as your home is concerned. So was your home compatible with your vision loss, or did that require a change as well?
Yeah, so we actually sold a house and moved because of my vision loss. We lived in a beautiful wooded community with no street lights and no public transportation nearby, and no real easy way to get around by foot. And we were at a point in our life when our kids were out of the house. And so we did make the decision to move to a mixed use community so that we put things close by so that I can walk to take care of so many of my daily needs. We actually even moved by all the doctors, so we can even walk to all my doctor appointments. But
oh, that's so great.
Yeah. So, but I will say, even in my old house, when we first moved in, there were modifications that I had to make. It was an older home, so lighting in that home wasn't great. And so I, added a lot of light. I added just a lot of LED uplights that provide a lot of room illumination. So I did a lot of that, and I did things, to make, I put some bump dots on some appliances so that I could feel buttons easier. And I equipped my kitchen with some low vision aids and things like that. So we did make modifications to that house, but I was very fortunate to be at a point in life where we could downsize and move to somewhere where I could walk to do a lot of things. So we did make a big life change as a result of the vision loss in the home. And then in the new house, I still had to, that was new construction, but again, lighting, it had a lot of lights, but they were all the wrong color. So I changed all the light bulbs to get the color of light that I like. And, I had to learn how to use new appliances. So again, I used some bump dots, and it's a 4-story townhome. So lots of stairs that I couldn't see. So added stair treads so I could add contrast to the stairs. And so there were modifications that we made even in the new house, but the ability to walk places was key.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Well, how did your family, and particularly your husband, help you navigate a new world, both in
Yeah.
terms of moving, but driving in terms of everything.
Yeah. So I, again, was very fortunate. Thankfully, my boys were all out of the house. So thankfully, it really didn't impact them too much. I'm just grateful that this happened after my years of being the chauffeur to all the activities and everything were over. And I was no longer responsible for their daily needs. They were in college, or one was already out of college, but that helped. My husband was great. He was very supportive. He went through the whole diagnosis journey with me, which could not have been easy. It wasn't easy for me. I'm sure it was not easy for him as well.
He must have been so fearful.
Yeah, and so he went through all that with me. And then, as I mentioned, he was very willing to leave a house that he loved. He loved that house, not so much the house, but we had just beautiful outdoor space, and a gorgeous screen porch that he was on he was out there even in the winter. I wouldn't go out there in the winter. It was too cold, but, so he was willing to leave this home that we both loved, but that he really loved, and move, to this concrete jungle that we live in, to meet my needs. And, he has very graciously taken over some of the things that are just hard for me to do. He's now the primary grocery shopper, because sometimes I go with him, sometimes I don't, because he drives the car, and can navigate, it just so much more easily. And, he's gotten more involved in some of my activities. For example, I do sing every Friday night, and before he went with me sometimes, but not always. Now he's there every Friday night, because guess what?
He drives you.
He needs to drive you.
So yeah, it definitely has impacted his life as well. And I'm very fortunate that I had a supportive partner, and the ability to be able to make these life changes without it being, very, very difficult to the rest of my family and financially and everything else. So I'm very lucky.
I wanted to ask you, you work for Dr. Suleiman Alibhai, who is a low vision specialist. And I am just going to put in a plug myself. I have been a patient, and I've also worked for him. If anyone in our listening audience is in the DMV, he is worth the time. Not worth the time, run. Make an appointment. He is so extraordinary. Now that I'm talking about him, Rachel, let me give you the opportunity to say what you do for him in his office, and I'll let you brag on him as well. Because he's just he's a special human being. And if for anyone who has low vision issues, please make an appointment.
He really is. And I'll say that I'm a patient as well, as an employee. So I started with him as a patient, and the best thing that ever happened to me was being referred to him, because this was, as we previously discussed, very scary. And especially early on, before I learned all my adaptations and was able to start to utilize some of my peripheral vision a little bit. I was scared. It's very scary. And I tell people all the time, my first appointment with him was the day I knew I was going to be okay, because he has such a good way. And this is why this is why I work for him. And this is why his entire staff, we all have low vision, and we are all patients, and we all help him, not as a job, but as a way to support the practice in him and give back to the low vision community. So specifically what I do for him is twofold. I'm with him once a week in the office. And on the surface, if a patient comes in, I just look like the receptionist. I'm checking them in and taking their documents and their insurance cards and, going through what you would normally go through at the check-in process at a doctor's office. But our primary purpose, one, is to fulfill that clerical function that someone has to fulfill. But more importantly, or equally importantly, we are utilizing to do this a lot of assistive technology. So we are demonstrating to patients what can be done with low vision. And also, Dr. Alibhai will identify, based on an individual patient's needs, what some strategies, techniques, devices, things might help them. And at the end of the appointment, then he often will leave them with us and say, okay, we talked about X, Y, and Z. Can you show them how you use that? Or talk to them about this service or whatever the case may be. So we're really there as a resource to the patients as well. And the other thing I do for him, because I do have a background in accounting and I'm no longer able to really work in my field, I do manage his billing and have been able to kind of attempt to bring some of my accounting and business experience into the office and try to, streamline things a little bit. So those are my roles.
Oh, that's a great gift. Now, you also work with the prevention of blindness, or POB. We on the podcast are familiar with POB because we interview two wonderful guests. And for our listeners, you can look to episode 27 for that interview. So, Rachel, can you tell us what you do for POB?
I can. So I once a month work in one of their low vision resource centers as a resource navigator. And so POB offers these resource centers for people with low vision to come in and do any number of things. So I'm there once a month. We can talk about resources. We can talk about things, like audiobooks and transportation resources and accessible pharmacy labeling and things like that. Any number of those things. We have assistive technology in the office in the form of magnification. So we have both optical magnification and video magnification that we can demo and people can try and see what works for them. We have examples of lighting, and we can talk about how lighting is so critical for someone with low vision and how you might maximize and utilize lighting to your advantage. We work with people on their smartphones and devices like iPads to help them with the accessibility features and maybe show them and teach them how to use some of the wonderful apps that are out there to help people with low vision. So any and all of the above. So it's really rewarding. So again, I do that once a month. I'm there and work with clients that have low vision. So it's a great resource. If listeners happen to have vision issues and live in the greater Washington area, there's a center in Bethesda and one in Alexandria, Virginia. So Bethesda, Maryland, Alexandria, Virginia, and I highly recommend it.
How did you adapt to a new life with low vision in other areas of your life? Can you share your coping strategies?
I think the biggest piece for me in learning to adapt was acceptance to the situation and a willingness to adapt. I really focused my energies on action and learning as opposed to wallowing in my loss. And I know that's really hard for a lot of people to do, but that's just kind of the way that I deal with life. When I had my last appointment with the neuro-ophthalmologist and he said, okay, the swelling is gone and this is your vision now. My comment to him was, I accept it, I understand, but I'm 55 years old and I have a lot of life left in me. How do I live with this? And that's when he referred me to Dr. Alibhai. So really, I set to learning. And I was, in some ways, Dr. Alibhai was the path to getting the rehabilitation care through the Virginia Department for the Blind and Visually Impaired. He sent me to an occupational therapist. And so he started me on the path to rehabilitation. But I was in some ways very fortunate that this happened right before COVID, because, during COVID, life shut down for a lot of us and slowed down, not shut down, but slowed down. And so many of the rehabilitation agencies and organizations went virtual. So I spent the first probably 6 months of my rehabilitation journey just taking in as much new information and knowledge as I can. I went to both the NFB and the ACB conventions virtually and listened in on every minute of them. I took advantage of virtual training that DBVI put out and virtual training that the Columbia Lighthouse put out. So I kind of had a head start so that when I did start my in-person rehabilitation care through the Department for the Blind and Visually Impaired in Virginia, I had a little bit of a head start. And the other thing that I did that was so key to my success, and I really encourage other people to do, was I networked. I early on, pre-COVID, so right after my diagnosis, when I had my very first meeting with my DBVI counselor and was asking him about a bunch of technology. I want to see technology. He suggested that later that month, the National Federation of the Blind in Virginia was having their annual convention, and it was in the southern part of Virginia. And he suggested I might enjoy it. So here I was, new to low vision, not knowing what was going on. And I got on a bus with a bunch of blind people, and I went to the NFB convention. And my initial thought, like many people that we see, was, what am I doing with a bunch of blind people? I see more than many of them, and what am I going to learn from them? And I quickly discovered they were running circles around me, and where I could barely navigate the agenda at this convention, many of them were using phones and they were fine. And so I learned that there's something to be learned from everybody we meet. And so I really got actively involved in a local low vision support group, in the NFB, in any I interacted with anybody I could find that was blind or visually impaired. And through them, I learned about apps and techniques and resources. So in addition to the formal training that I received through DBVI, and I also went to a center in the Boston area, the Carroll Center for the Blind. I did some technology training up there. So in addition to the formal training I got, I've learned so much from others that have low vision. I'm sure you guys have found this as well. So, my coping strategy and what I would tell anybody else is, one, try to accept your loss and move forward as opposed to looking backwards.
Right.
Be open to doing things a different way, because there are many things that, other than driving a car and recognizing people, there's really nothing I can't do. I just have to do it differently.
Yes.
And I may not, I have to give myself the grace to understand that I'll be slower, that I may not be as quick, I may not be as accurate, and that's okay. And that precludes me from doing my old career. I will admit it, I couldn't do my old job still. But other than that, if you're open and willing to try new things and to take information and advice from others, because as much as I help other people in my roles with Dr. Alibhai and the POB, there are many times that people come in and tell me about an app or some kind of a tool that I didn't know about. So we learn from each other, and it's really all about your outlook and your attitude and your way of approaching the situation.
Well, Rachel, it's really been a pleasure to have you on the program. I know we're sorry that you experienced the vision loss, but I have to say, you are such a dynamo. I feel so energized by listening to you and how you've adapted to your new life and how you've given back. And I think you're really someone that we can take notice of and really learn so much from. Your ability to cope with this new life is really quite extraordinary. And I'm thrilled that you were here. You're an inspiration to all of us. Thank you.
Oh, and I have to add my thanks to you, Rachel. It's just been so inspiring to hear you speak about your journey and your experience and what you've learned. And listeners, I want to say if you want to learn more about optic neuropathies, we encourage you to listen to episode number 24 with Dr. Andrew Carey, who specializes in neuro-ophthalmic disorders and provides a wealth of information in that episode. Rachel, thank you. Be well. And thank you, listeners.
Thank you for listening to this episode of It Happened to Me. We encourage you to learn more at ithappenedtomepod.com. Please use the contact form on our website to submit your guest suggestions, comments, questions, ideas, and feedback for the show. You can also email us directly at ithappenedtomepod@gmail.com. We would really appreciate it if you can leave us a 5-star rating and review on your podcast app like Apple or Spotify. This helps others in the rare disease and medical challenge community find us. It Happened to Me is created and hosted by Kathy Gillenhorn and Beth Glassman. I'm Keir Deneen from DNA Today, and I serve as our executive producer and marketing lead. Amanda Andrioli is our associate producer. Ashlyn Anokian is our graphic designer. And remember, it happened to me. I'm not alone, and neither are you.